Coming up,
fur et à mesure, on n'est pas en sécurité.
a disappearing landscape and a community that could lose it all. A village on a tiny Caribbean island faces a massive problem.
Derrière sa maison, il y avait à peu près 12 mètres de terrain toujours. Et tout ça s'est enfalé dans la mer.
A new insurance initiative offers protection and coverage for Muslims experiencing climate shocks. And as the planet transitions to cleaner forms of power, we debate whether natural gas should be used as a so-called bridge fuel.
It is technically feasible for a country to rely solely on renewable energy.
We need a flexible gas, because otherwise we are basically shooting ourselves in the foot.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now,
One would say that you're almost making the argument to prolong the use of gas, maybe even permanently.
When we depict certain technology as green and others as black, I think we are kind of simplifying the world a little bit too much.
nations struggling the most to cope with the impacts of the climate crisis have quite a bit in common. Besides dealing with those issues, they are geographically vulnerable, have high levels of poverty and limited capacity to adapt, and most of them are majority Muslim.
ودقيق الغرق ملابس الغرق تعايدنا كسرت يعني من شدة الأمطار ولا أحد انتبه لنا لا منظمة ولا شيء ولا انتبهوا لنا أي حاجة انهار البيت فوقنا.
طونك مرات كر حسكي بالاسبوعي مالت سيدر بارات كر حلبي خير فربو عنها حاليا خير نماي مازوت نماي خابور زهابوي بقشي ما شني داسر هاف قشي دطون جينا هاد.
বেশি গরম পড়ে দিয়ে গাছগুলা নাই তেলপালার বাসা মানুষ গরম বেশি পড়ে মানুষ ঘন থাকি না পারে নিচে বাসা তেলপালার বাসা।
Meanwhile, there is protection being offered to Muslims in high-risk areas. The word Takaful in Arabic means mutual guarantee, and it's a form of Islamic mutual insurance which the UN Development Programme says offers a culturally aligned approach to risk protection. A global Takaful alliance is also gaining momentum, with commercial insurance providers saying they'll stay clear of industries that cause significant environmental harm. To get a better sense of what Takaful is, I rang up Kellett, the UNDP's global and corporate lead on insurance and risk finance. Many Muslims live in regions that are prone to climate shocks. Who is Takaful targeting? And talk a bit about how it works exactly, this form of insurance.
Yes, thank you so much. So, yes, there are about, if you look at, for example, climate-prone countries, the top 13 of those, or 13 of the 27 of those are Muslim-majority countries. And there are around the world, if you take the top 10 Muslim countries by population, which is 1.3 billion people as a whole, the financial resilience within those countries is very weak indeed. In fact, less than 1% of GDP, which is an indicator of how much financial resilience there is. The global average is 7%. So immediately you see there are many Muslim countries and communities in the front line of changing climate without financial resilience. Takaful is essentially, if you like, a Sharia adherent solution, which avoids some of the challenges of traditional insurance, especially, for example, how investment on one side, the liability side, the protective side, which is the granting of insurance, how the assets of that are used on the other side. And essentially what Takaful is rather than that being allowed to be used to invest into markets and other kinds of things, it has to be reinvested back into the community. It's essentially really like a mutual insurance.
Based on the description, it reminds me of something called, in the Caribbean, that we call a susu. I believe people in Africa, and parts of Africa, call it that as well, where people just pool money and every month the money is just reimbursed to one person. It sounds a bit similar to that. But I do have some questions in terms of the general criticism of insurance. Firstly, insurance companies can reject applications and claims. I know you guys focus on farmers, so let's say farmers from farmers for a number of reasons. Under what conditions would Takaful reject someone's applications or claims for climate coverage?
An insurer, an insurance policy is drafted, and if it's drafted accordingly and the customer knows exactly what it's for, then they should have there should be an understanding of what they can claim for or what they can not claim for. And that should be the same on the other side. This is a contract between parties. And if the insurer believes that the incident that has occurred, the hazard, the drought, the flood, whatever it may be, has occurred, then they should pay out accordingly. But of course, there are certain cases when claims are contested. I mean, that is part and parcel of the system.
If, say, I live in Pakistan and the area in which I live is hit by monsoon rains every year, I get flooded out every year, how does that information affect my application for a Takaful insurance policy?
So I would say that one of the key things that you have to do in Pakistan is actually reduce risk. One of the areas of which is a challenge for Pakistan is to make sure you do not have building zones, industrial zones, farms, and so forth in places where actually there's regular flooding. So
then I would be denied an insurance policy from Takaful if I lived in a high-prone area, or would my premiums just be extremely high?
That is possible. I mean, most insurers will tell you, and most Takaful providers, is that they will sell you insurance of any price if you're willing to pay. What we need to do is to make sure, as part of our insurance work and part of our Takaful work, that we're also looking to reduce the risk, because that's good for people. It makes not much sense, for example, that you are each and every year paying a high price of insurance and continually claiming and continually having a high price.
Interesting. One of the growing criticisms of the insurance company is its support of fossil fuel polluters, oil and gas, coal. Their financing of projects specifically and insuring of projects. Does Takaful insure polluters? Do you plan to? Do you already do it?
Now, I don't know actually about Takaful providers about how they look at these issues. I would imagine, because the model is about reinvesting in the local community, that we would be unlikely to see those kinds of things. Perhaps on a local level, this you could imagine, but because the model is actually, you on the one hand share the risk, but you also on the other hand share the prosperity locally, I could not imagine this being a very significant issue, except in a few cases where you might have some providers who are doing something which have to be perhaps reined in by the insurance regulators, by the Takaful regulators.
So does Takaful insure polluters?
I mean, I'd say I don't know the answer to that fully, but I would be highly surprised if it is the case.
Well, some of the loudest calls for climate action come from people living in small island nations. You may recall the powerful video of Tuvalu's leader standing waist deep in water and seawater as he addressed the UN General Assembly.
We cannot wait for speeches when the sea is rising around us all the time. Climate mobility must come to the forefront. We must take bold, alternative action today to secure tomorrow.
This act was meant to go viral and also draw attention to a reality so many people face. Yet this crisis extends beyond Tuvalu. A similar struggle is unfolding in Cap-Ster-Belle-Eau, which is a village in Guadeloupe where rising sea levels and increasingly frequent storms are an annual and very real threat to coastal communities.
Residents of this village in Guadeloupe hold their breath every time a wave crashes against this already weakened coastline. Many homes have already fallen into the sea, a fate that's likely to be repeated.
Les 15 km, nous avons identifié, alors, sur l'ensemble du territoire, nous avons 78 familles. De ces 78, nous avons 18 qui sont directement menacées par l'érosion.
In only 5 years, around 8 meters of Guadeloupe's coast have been swallowed because of stronger hurricanes and more frequent floods. It's an existential terror for nearly 1/4 of the population, who lives less than 10 meters above sea level. For years, residents of Guadeloupe have been calling on France to help them construct a seawall to prevent salt water from seeping into ground freshwater systems.
Au fur et à mesure, on n'est pas en sécurité. Il y a les cyclones, il y a le déluge Fiona qui est passé. Et jusqu'à maintenant, il y a des promesses de l'ancienne municipalité, mais on n'a vu rien venir.
Neglecting the island's inhabitants has been a frustrating trend. Early in 2024, UN experts criticized France for Guadeloupe's long-standing water shortages, and global warming has had detrimental effects on the island. The mangroves, vital for protecting against flooding, have been weakening due to increasingly powerful storms. Hurricanes have decimated the island's banana plantations, destroyed other crops like sugarcane, and caused severe damage to roads. And researchers warn that by 2030, approximately 23,000 people may lose their homes or be forced to relocate to higher ground.
Sa maison est tombée, la moitié de la maison est tombée dans la mer. Et derrière sa maison, il y avait à peu près 12 mètres de terrain toujours. Et tout ça s'est enfalé dans la mer.
While politicians in Paris remain deadlocked over how to allocate funds to Guadeloupe, scenes like this are unfolding across the region. According to medical journal The Lancet, Caribbean economies have borne the heaviest financial burden of storm damage over the past 2 decades, with losses totaling $112 billion since 2000. And a frightening trajectory. A lot worse is forecast, as half of the Caribbean's population lives within 1.5 kilometers of the coast.
As we explore avenues to prevent a collision course with the natural world, a new analysis by the European Environmental Bureau reveals that Europe has all the land it needs to expand solar and wind energy without compromising food production or nature. But there is a but. Political will and regional solidarity prevent expeditiousness on the issue. And that's mirrored across the globe. Wartsila, a global energy and marine organization, believes using gas would help bridge energy gaps while we transition to renewables-only power and save money doing it.
I don't think anyone can argue that. I think we are in a transition era. Some countries have already been getting energy from several sources. In your study, you talk about the advantages of adding balancing power plants. Yeah. What does that mean exactly? And talk about the cost savings in there.
Yeah, I mean, if we look on the global energy system, it will be very much a journey from, you could say, big coal-fired or even gas-fired base load to installing more and more renewables, so solar and wind. In many parts of the world, it's actually the cheapest energy per kilowatt hour, but of course the sustainability aspect also comes in. So when we make this shift, we will discover the value of balancing power, because we all know the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and you need this balancing power to make sure that the power system stays stable at all times. And this is where, you know, balancing technology comes in. it's about battery storage, but it's also about thermal balancing. So this is the big topic of our study. And we show that, you know, you need to consider the balancing or you will overspend a lot of money. I mean, we estimated like 65 trillion euro. It's a huge sum of money. It corresponds basically to 2% of global GDP a year. So the key thing here, if you have the thermal or the gas-fired balancing, you can make the transition to renewables much more affordable, and you can make it rapidly, and then in the final stage you can actually convert the gas-fired, if you want to convert it to you know, green fuels.
If I spoke with climate scientists or climate activists, one would say that you're almost making the argument to prolong the use of gas, maybe even permanently. What's your comment to that?
I think we need to make a distinction. I mean, first of all, green is not black or white. When we depict certain technology as green and others as black, I think we are kind of simplifying the world a little bit too much. I mean, base load. I mean, the steady base load that is generated by coal and by gas today, we need to get out of, clearly. Over time, we need to get out of that. And the major way to get out of that is to introduce renewables. But as renewables are intermittent, you need the balancing power. And here we need to acknowledge that gas has a role to play in a transition. Otherwise, we will spend much more money. It will take much longer time. And actually, it will be to the detriment also of the environment. So that is my point.
The group ResearchGate says, quote, it is technically feasible for a country to rely solely on renewable energy. It requires careful planning, investment, and commitment from both the government and the private sector. A mix of renewable energy sources, energy storage solutions, and supportive policies is essential to make the transition successful. I guess the question is there political will, you think, to create policy and regulations to support this full transition and quickly?
So I think that's the speed and the willingness varies from different countries in the world. I mean, in many parts of the world, if I take an example, if we talk about Texas, I think we all associate the state of Texas with oil and gas, but it's a matter of fact that 40% of the installed energy in Texas these days is renewables. I mean, they are the leader in the US in wind, ahead of California, and people say that they will be ahead also on solar in a couple of years. And the major driver for Texas to introduce so much renewables, it's very affordable, it's cheap energy. And this is also, since they have installed a lot of renewables, they have also realized the need for balancing power. So Texas is one of those markets where we see a lot of activities in balance.
People have been describing gas as a bridge fuel for decades. Well, obviously because it's believed to be cheaper than coal and oil. As you mentioned, wind and solar are much cheaper these days. Do you think the world can afford, even can agree to ramp up new renewables, make them more reliable by 2050? Do you think 2050 is the actual goal that's attainable?
Well, I think we can have quite a few views on that. I think it is achievable, but if we want to get close to that, we need to accelerate. And if we want to have the power system in a way that we are used to, stable, that we can build industries, we can build households on, it's not only about adding wind farms and solar. You need this balancing power because otherwise it won't work.
And that's our show. Well, beautiful images of a frigid winter can give you warm feelings, right? But the seasons have been erratic of late. The past years have seen record summer and dry season heat. And it's not been cold enough to even consider winter in some places. Things may change again with La Nina underway. In the meantime, I hope you remain safe no matter the season, no matter the weather.